rocks around the earth. And here we have some bones of an animal. It's obviously a large animal and has certain characteristics, which is why they call these creatures dinosaurs. Let me explain that to you. The word dinosaur, in fact, was first invented in 1841 by a man called Sir Richard Owen over there in England. And they'd found the bones of these great big reptiles, and they were different to other reptiles, and so he coined the term dinosaur, which means terrible lizard, or great monster on four legs, basically, great lizard. So the word dinosaur is really a made-up word. I've had lots of boys and girls say to me, Mr. Ham, why don't we find the word dinosaur in the Bible if you believe God made the dinosaurs? Well, we don't find the word dinosaur in the Bible because it's a made-up word. A man made it up. Dinosaur means terrible lizard, great monster. Actually, there is a word in the Bible that means great monster on four legs. It's a word called behemoth, and we'll talk about that a little later on. It's found in the book of Job. In fact, Job chapter 40 talks about behemoth, a great monster on four legs that I'll explain to you later, I think was probably a dinosaur. But if you have a look at this picture here, you'll notice that on the skull there are some holes on the skull. Now, alligators and crocodiles have holes on the skull like that too, but alligators and crocodiles are not dinosaurs. If you've ever seen an alligator and crocodile walk, their legs are sort of out to the side and they waddle along. Have you seen animals like that? Like the lizards of today? Well, dinosaurs had legs and hips to enable them to walk upright, like elephants or horses. So if they have holes in their skull like this, and the hips enable them to walk upright, and a few other characteristics as well, that's what makes up a dinosaur. So dinosaurs are not like the lizards we have today. The lizards today are very different to dinosaurs. They were a distinct group of animal, a very distinct group of animal. Now, you've probably heard, in fact, how many of you have heard that dinosaurs lived millions of years ago? Have you heard that? That there was a dinosaur age supposedly 70 to 200 million years ago. But you know what, boys and girls? I don't believe there was a dinosaur age 70 to 200 million years ago. In fact, you know, when somebody says that to me, I'll tell you what I do. Because I've read a book in the Bible called Job, in Job chapter 38 and verse 4, God asked Job a question. He said, Job, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Where were you? In other words, were you there, Job? Were you there? You know what I say to people when they say to me dinosaurs lived millions of years ago? I ask them a very simple question. I say, were you there? Next time a teacher says to you, millions of years ago, put your hand up and say, excuse me, sir, were you there? Some of them look old enough to have been there, don't you think? Hey? Maybe they do. In fact, can you say that question for me? The next time somebody says millions of years ago, what do you say to them? Were you there? Of course, they'll say to you, well, no, but you weren't either. And you'll say, no, I wasn't, but I know someone who's always been there. Are you interested? In fact, can you tell me who's always been there? Ah, God's always been there. That's right. Now, you remember that. No scientist has ever always been there. No human being has always been there, but there is someone who has always been there. God has always been there. And I'll tell you about that in a moment. But let me ask you all a question first. To find out what happened to the dinosaurs, I'm going to ask you a very different sort of question. There's an egg and a chicken coming out of an egg, and here's my question to you. What came first, the chicken or the egg? All right, no calling out. Now, everyone just put their hand up when I ask for an answer here. Who says the chicken came first? Put your hand up, all right. Who says the egg came first? Well, that's interesting. The egg came first. Okay, down here, you said the egg came first. Now, all scientists have a good reason. Why did the egg come first? Because a chicken had to hatch from an egg. Well, that's interesting, but an egg has to come from a chicken. Now we've got a real problem, haven't we? Who says the chicken came first? Well, that's interesting. You know what? I was at a school recently and I asked that question. You know what one young man said? He got up and said, the chicken came first, sir. And I said, why? He said, because God invented the chicken. I thought that was a pretty good answer, don't you? Because God invented the chicken. In fact, you see, I believe God made all the animals. In fact, remember what I said to you before? The only way you'd know what happened in the past if someone's always been there. Who's always been there? Ah, God's always been there. Well, you know, when I go to a book called the Bible tells me that it's the Word of God. It says it's not just an ordinary book, it's a very special book. It says it's the revealed Word of God, that God's always been there, that God moved men by His Spirit to write His words, and from Genesis to Revelation, this claims to be a revealed Word from one who's always been there. Now, if that's true, if God doesn't tell a lie and He's always been there and this is His Word, and He tells us how we got here, maybe He has an answer to what came first, the chicken or the egg. And in fact, when we go to the Bible and we look In the book of Genesis, we find out that God made everything in 6 days. In 6 days. In fact, you know what, boys and girls? I often wondered why God took so long. I mean, why did he take 6 days? I mean, God, who's infinite in power, infinite in wisdom, he could have made the world in no time at all, couldn't he? But he didn't. He took 6 days. Do you know why he took 6 days? Well, do you have a 7-day week at your house? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Do you know why we have a 7-day week? Because God made the world in 6 days and rested for 1. That's why we have a 7-day week. He made the world in 6 days and rested for 1. Did he make them in 6 million years and rest for 1 million years? Imagine that. You could have a 1,000,000-year rest and never go to school. You'd enjoy that, wouldn't you? Yes, you certainly would. Then you'd never learn anything. Well, the Bible tells us God made everything in 6 days. And he tells us what he did on each day. On day 1, he made the heavens and the earth, the space and the earth. On day 2, he separated the waters above. He made the atmosphere. On day 3, he made the land and the plants. On day 4, he made the sun, moon and stars. And on day 5, he made the sea creatures and the birds. Sea creatures and the birds. How did you say that? Birds. Do you realise how much you roll your R's? See, in Australia, we just say birds. We get it over and done with. It doesn't take long at all. Can you say it like Australians? That's terrible. Don't try doing that ever again, all right? You can stick with your birds. But he made the sea creatures and birds on day 5. Now, you think for a moment. If he made the sea creatures and birds on day 5 and God's always been there, now tell me, what came first, the chicken or the egg? The chicken, obviously, because the chicken's not a reptile. We know chicken is a bird. And he didn't say he made the eggs first. He said he made the birds first. And then he said, be fruitful and multiply, so they laid eggs. So that's easy to understand, isn't it? By the way, mums, dads and teachers, do you realise how important it is to teach students like that? The only way we would know what happened in the past if someone was there. God's always been there. We go to his word. He's given us information. Let's start from the Bible and we can solve the problem. What came first, the chicken or the egg? Now, I want to say this to you also. We can solve the problem of the dinosaurs because God's always been there. No scientist has. In fact, when scientists say, but dinosaurs lived millions of years ago, what question do you ask them? Were you there? I really like that question, don't you? Were you there? They weren't there. But who's always been there? God's always been there. And you know, when we go to the Bible, it says, on day 5 he made the sea creatures and the birds, but on day 6 he made the land animals and the first 2 people, Adam and Eve. Now the word dinosaur, made up by Sir Richard Owen in 1841, refers to those great big reptiles that lived on the land. So the word dinosaur really specifically applies to those great reptiles that lived on the land that had the characteristics that made them dinosaurs. So if the Bible's right, it means God made the dinosaurs, because dinosaurs are land animals, he made them on day 6. And you can imagine, if you were there in the Garden of Eden and they had their newspaper, the 6-Day Chronicle, dinosaurs made on day 6. Can you imagine that? Wouldn't that be exciting? Big headline in the newspaper. You see, we think dinosaurs are a big problem. They're not a problem at all. Made on day 6. And by the way, if they were made on day 6, alongside them were made Adam and Eve, the first 2 people. The first 2 people. That means dinosaurs and people must have lived at the same time. And I can prove that to you. I have a photograph that Eve took in the Garden of Eden. And there you can see Adam and Tyrannosaurus, and you can see the kangaroo. And by the way, do you think that means the Garden of Eden was in Australia? We like to think so. Actually, we don't know where the Garden of Eden was because, as I'll tell you in a little while, the whole world's been destroyed by a flood at the time of Noah's day, so we haven't got a clue where the Garden of Eden used to be. The world's been ripped up and destroyed by a flood. But you know, when I look at dinosaurs and I see how great these animals were, I could just imagine a dinosaur saying, God does great work, doesn't he? I mean, look how strong we are. Look how beautiful we are. You see, I think dinosaurs were beautiful creatures. And they were beautiful to look at. But you can imagine, back there in the Garden of Eden, here we have dinosaurs and Adam and Eve living happily together. You know, I have boys and girls that say to me, Mr. Ham, yes, I've got a problem. What's that? Well, you showed us Tyrannosaurus before. That's right. In fact, let's have a look at Tyrannosaurus again. And you showed us his big teeth. Yes, that's correct. I showed you his big teeth. Here we have his teeth here. But he was so savage, Adam would have been frightened of Tyrannosaurus. I mean, if you take a close-up look at his teeth, in fact, I got close enough to a dinosaur one day and took a close-up